Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Agenda Series webinars, where Africa's leading thinkers come together at the Talent Agenda Series to discuss the challenges facing talent development and employee experiences on our continent. Welcome to our extremely impressive panel for today. I will, in a few moments, just take the time to introduce each one of them because they each come with a plethora of experience and knowledge. And so we're very lucky to have them with us all today. The session today is hosted by GCC, and we are going to be exploring the future of work. And so a very relevant and current topic that I think interests all of us across industries, across levels of roles within work. Doesn't matter where you are in the world and what job you currently have. Considering the future world of work is something that's really important for all of us to consider. So first, to introduce myself, my name is Yael Rosen, and I am the host for the session today. I'm the co-founder of a business called Ferva, which is a team of industrial psychologists that supports businesses both locally in South Africa, as well as some businesses in the UK and Europe, to help them solve problems that impact people in their organizations. And so as a team of industrial or organizational psychologists, this really is our area of expertise. The reason why in my title there it also says my feedback guru and pulse motivation is because our business has two tech products. Pulse motivation is really about understanding what drives and motivates your teams and understands the gap between what they need and what you as a business are able to achieve. And then my feedback guru is an online feedback platform that allows leaders and teams to share anonymous feedback with each other. I'm very honored today to have been given the opportunity by GCC, so thank you so much. And just to be sitting amongst some really impressive leaders and specialists in their space today. So thank you guys all so much for your time. So I'm going to jump straight into introductions. They are going to be a bit lengthy, but that's what happens when you have a panel of impressive people. So just do bear with me for the first kind of intro minutes when I just explain our panel to you. Okay, great. So today, our first panelist is Nyonkabe Florence. She is the head of HR for Nigeria and West Africa for Standard Chartered Bank. She is an accomplished HR professional with over 20 years progressive experience in HR, with leading blue chip entities across Africa, spanning media, banking, and consulting. She's currently the head of HR for Standard Chartered Bank, responsible for 6 countries in West Africa, which includes Nigeria and Ghana. Nyonkabe holds a track record of demonstrable achievements in driving HR culture transformation and repositioning the people agenda in organizations. She is especially passionate about talent management. And I have no doubt today when she comes on to share with us some of her knowledge that you'll be blown away by some of the experience and the work that she's done. So Nyonkabe, I'd love you to mute and just wave and say hi to our team today.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, Rael. It's wonderful to be here today. And I'm looking forward to sharing thought leadership and views with colleagues and people who have joined this forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm then going to jump over to Jack. Jack Pegram is the Managing Director of Field Ready. He has a strong background in conducting in-depth market research by analyzing trends and developments impacting the energy sector. He's currently responsible for developing Field Ready in new markets around the world. As the Managing Director, Jack is also responsible for building the Field Ready team in the UK and internationally. Jack is passionate about producing highly employable local people in Africa. And I think what's most interesting about Jack's profile and the work that he does is that he really bridges the gap between young, talented individuals who are graduates and how do we get those amazing people into the working world. So Jack, thank you so much. Welcome today. Please introduce yourself to everyone and just say hi.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very humbling introduction. Thank you very much, Yael, and nice to meet everyone.
Great. Definitely humbling, but a very impressive resume background, Jack. So thank you so much. We then have Tasantha Naidu with us. She is a career consultant at Mercer. Tess is what we like to call her, has over 14 years of experience in strategic HR consulting, primarily focusing on workforce transformation projects, where she helps clients to understand their existing human capital landscape and define their fit-for-purpose future operating models using global leading practice frameworks and methodologies. Her experience covers workforce transformation within the HR and business process outsourcing environments. She has worked within the areas of business architecture, change management, workforce transition, finance transformation, process design, organizational design, and more. So hugely experienced. And I know that Tasantha and the team that she works with has been immensely involved in a lot of the research conducted. And I know she's going to share some really interesting information and statistics with us today, just to get a lay of the land in the current market. So Tasantha, welcome.
Thanks, Yael. Hi, everyone, and really looking forward to interacting with everyone today.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, and maybe we save the best for last, Gibson, so don't feel like it's a running order. Gibson, I think, is the head of health and benefits for Anglo Africa Willis Towers Watson. He has over 15 years experience in the insurance industry, specializing in employee benefits. He forms part of the WTW Africa consulting team that specializes in research, product development, compliance checks, and placement of complex international employee benefits insurance and self-funded solutions. Over the course of his career, Gibson has built deep insight using analytics to model innovative bespoke solutions in medical and wellness initiatives for clients and insurance companies. Gibson, thank you so much for your time today. Please say hi to everyone who's here.
Thank you very much for allowing me to join the panel discussion, and I'm really looking forward to sharing ideas with the rest of my colleagues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gibson. So I guess for today, the real intention is to dive into this big theme, which is current for all of us, for anyone who has a job or even has a child, thinking about exploring the future world of work. As you know, we've got Tasantha on our team, and she's shared some really interesting, data and research that's taken place by the Mercer team in partnership with the World Economic Forum. And that's alongside many other research happening today by businesses like Deloitte and PwC. They're also focusing on what does the kind of future of work look like. And I think what's really important is that this isn't about some kind of far future of work that lies in centuries ahead and we're planning for the year 3000, but really change is already happening and accelerating in front of our eyes each and every day. So I think based on knowing and experiencing the last 18 months, wherever you've been in the world, going through a global pandemic has been very challenging. And ultimately, we are living through a fundamental transformation in the way that we work. So automation and thinking machines are replacing human tasks and jobs and changing the skills that organizations are looking for when looking for talented people. And these monumentous changes raise huge organizational talent and HR challenges, which I think in all our different roles and spheres, we've all had a lot of exposure to. And this all happens at a time when business leaders are already wrestling with unprecedented risks, disruption, and political and societal upheaval. And of course, the global pandemic, which has impacted all of us. I think then really also importantly, in terms of setting the scene today, the future isn't a fixed destination. And with this in mind, we need to consider a very dynamic and rather than a static future. And so businesses need to recognize multiple and evolving scenarios of what this world of work in the future looks like. And so with that in mind, and this kind of theme that we're going to chat about today, I'm going to really pose our first question that we're going to talk about. And it's going to be quite a practical question. So how are businesses today preparing for the future of work? And ultimately, what are some of the key things that businesses are doing today to prepare us for the world of work that lies ahead? In our pre-discussions that we've had prior to kind of preparing for the panel today, Nyonkabe had some really interesting insights, ideas, and experience based on the work that she's had. I'm going to really choose to pass this question her way to really kick us off for the session today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rael. So indeed, you're right when you say that we are at a point of inflection. And when I look at it, I look at it as more like a watershed moment, akin to what happened back in the 1880s when we experienced the Industrial Revolution. Then fast forward to 1940s, World War II, and women began to come into the workplace. And then the next point of inflection being in early 90s when internet and computers and technology began to take over the world. And then there's now. where we experience, and the major point of inflection is whereby following the pandemic, which I see more as a catalyst of a change that was already in the way. Following the pandemic, we've seen a significant shift in the experience and relationship between the employer and the employee. And for organizations to thrive, they will need to redefine that. So from a practical sense, the way we are interpreting the future of work, I look at it two ways, two dimensions. One, the future skill sets that are required to thrive in the new and future world of work. And two, the future workplace, i.e. the way work is carried out in terms of flexibility. When we start with the latter, which is a future workplace. Most organizations are beginning to review their organization designs and structure and question themselves what kind of cultural environment that allows for flexibility will enable them to thrive in the future. I was reading a study the other day by McKinsey, and it says close to 70% of employees want to work flexibly going forward. Pre-pandemic, that was only 38%. So with that level of demand, organizations are having to revisit how to organize the work flexibility. At Standard Chartered Bank, we've recently introduced flexible working as a permanent approach. So post-pandemic, this is an approach we'll take on into perpetuity. And that looks at location flexibility, where people can work from home, from the office, from a near home location, and a mix of that. And the other flexibility we are looking at is time flexibility, where people can vary their working hours, still be able to meet their business needs while at the same time fulfilling their personal demands. That has its plus in terms of improved quality of life and family connections, even more productivity. It's got its flip side too, and I guess we'll discuss that as we go forward. The second dimension of future of work, and I'll go through this very quickly, is with respect to the engine itself, future skills. What skills are relevant now that are going to enable us thrive and succeed in the future? Again, it's believed that we need to reinvent ourselves every 3 to 5 years in terms of our skills and mindsets if we are to remain agile enough to be able to survive and thrive, not just survive, but thrive actually in the future world of work. So again, the organization where I am working, we have reviewed what skills will be relevant for the business to succeed in the future, and are actively working to repurpose the capabilities of our people to be able to acquire those skills so that then they can remain relevant for the future. Some of those skills include critical thinking, data and digital analytics, agility, new ways of working. That probably applies more to the finance industry. So I would be curious to hear what other markets and other industries are adapting the future skills and future ready workforce. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyonkabe. Just really insightful. And I think you've kind of positioned us to focus some time on two very important topics. The one is really about what do employers need to do to become an employer of choice and start thinking about the future world of work. And the other has to do with skills. So I think I'm going to dive into the skills piece in terms of the next part of what I'd love to chat about. And I think organizations can't protect jobs which are made redundant by technology, but they do have a responsibility to their people to protect their jobs. And what that really means is about nurture, agility, adaptability, and reskilling. So I'd love to direct this question to Jack. Jack, I know skills, young skills, and people, graduates coming out of university are talented. They might be studying a particular set of degrees or getting particular sets of insights, but what does it mean for their future and the kind of jobs that they'll be going into? And we'd love to hear your perceptions of skills of the future.
I think that's really, thank you so much. And it was really interesting to hear what Nyonkabe was saying, because the organizations that we work with and historically have worked with principally are industrial organizations. And so that could be mining, it could be FMCG, it could be manufacturing. And so I think this idea of flexible working and this idea of hybrid working isn't really so possible when you are a manufacturer or a brewer, for example, because you need people in the workplace. You can't do that from home. You can't do that at different timelines. And so, yet, despite that difference between, say, the banking sector and the industrial sector, some of the skills that you were talking about, we hear about all the time. And that can be for people that are coming into the business, or it can be for people who are already existing in the business. So those things you talked around to do with the skills that are kind of you're looking for and building, we call them applied personal skills. So these are things around that adaptability, professionalism, critical thinking, working in a team, communication skills, seeing yourself as part of a bigger organization or structure, for example. And so I think that's a really interesting one. But I think there's also there's something around the way in which as HR leaders and as business and line managers, when we think about young people, particularly coming into the business and junior staff, we see that when we're talking about skills specifically, and we see that there's a requirement for line managers across all functions. But when we talk in our world, we talk particularly around technical line managers, being great coaches of junior staff. And that takes training. Most people are brilliant within their technical field, but they often aren't so great at getting the most out of junior people, the most out of young people. And so I think there's a real requirement for employers to support on both ends, identifying and building up those kind of applied personal skills, but also helping line managers to get the most out of junior people by making them become great coaches and mentors of those junior staff. And that's something that we do a lot of work on.
Okay, great, Jack. Thank you so much. Just really insightful to understand and see. And I think you play a huge purpose in Africa in order for us to get the best possible people into organizations. But I think towards the end of your comment, you raised a really important thing. So not only is it about upskilling the workforce today for what the future looks like, but what does skills of leadership look like going forward? And how do we think about what leadership will look like in the coming 5, 10, 15 years? I'd love to direct this question to Santha. I know that at Mercer, they've done a huge amount of research specifically in the skills space and skills of the future. So yeah, Santha, please, we'd love to hear from you on this topic.
Thanks, Yael. And you made a very important point, I think, in your introduction about, this is not in the year 3000. So based on our research, what we've seen is by 2025, 50% of all employees will need reskilling, and more than 1 billion jobs, which is almost a third of all jobs worldwide, are likely to be transformed by technology in the next decade. And then Nyonkabe mentioned another important point in terms of flexible working. We talk about location, and traditionally it was just location. Then it became about time, but now it's also about the type of skills you have. So it's not just, this is my job description. I need to be in a position as an employee, as an organization, to be able to upskill and reskill the workforce. Now, when you talk about leadership, we have an accountability, and ESG has become a big thing in the last 2 years, especially with COVID, when it highlighted the social injustice across the various groups. Leadership had to take much more of an accountability in terms of the ESG, so the environment, the social, and the governance. And in terms of those people skills, start investing in communities. And it became a case of embracing stakeholder capitalism, which means it was no longer just about shareholders. So what are you doing in your community, in your communities? If you look at suppliers, are you giving everyone a chance? And at the same time, sub-Saharan Africa actually has the youngest population in the world. So corporates and global multinationals now have a responsibility to actually start educating and funding these institutions and kids from a much younger age to actually build those skills that are required for the future. So, I mean, if we look at skills, we always talk about, we spoke about technical skills being important, but if you look at remote working, the skills that have become more critical or the most critical are things like collaboration skills, self-management skills, inclusive and empathetic management. So from a leadership perspective, it's much more people oriented rather than, just looking at the bottom line.
Okay, great, Tess. Thank you so much. Just really interesting to get like such practical insights into what those skills look like. I think that's really interesting for us to hear and learn about. And I think it talks to so many things that even though they're skills for the future, we're starting to feel how important those are even today. And the need to focus on them is really important. I would love to bring Gibson into the conversation. I think with regards to what Tess positioned, thinking about access to the internet and the digital divide for communities and SMEs, and the role that AI plays in the space, Gibson, I think would be really interesting for you to share with us.
Yeah, I think those points that have been raised, especially by Florence, in regards to how we are preparing employees for the future of work, which is already here, is really key. And AI, I find, is an important tool in just making that distinction and removing biases. Because AI technology really cares less about who's answering the question. It cares more about how those questions are asked. I think that is one of the basic or the more fundamental filters in terms of coming up with the best talent. So that's a key area that people have to address. And Jack also spoke to the broad scale in terms of how work is divided. So you have on one side very low value, I would call them low aptitude kinds of jobs, and then you have on this other scale high value, very cognitive types of work that people need to be engaged in. And what we are seeing leaders doing increasingly is just saying, okay, so if we break up these high tasks and, for example, give them to 10 people, what is the value of that work? Is it equivalent to what we are paying that one person? And then reimagining that work and saying, you know what, maybe there's a way that we can reimagine it so that these high value work can be presented in such a manner that you would better reskilling, you'd allow better coaching, better mentoring, so that we have a good talent pool that is coming up in an organization, so that we don't have this issue where we are paying premium not because that talent is not available, but you're paying premium because of scarcity, and that is not a place where organization wants to find themselves. Yeah.
Okay, great. Gibson, sorry, your line is cutting a little bit, but I did hear most of what you were saying. Just one or two words were missed out, but I did get the gist of it. So thank you so much. I think the next piece that I'm just wanting to dive into, which really was positioned originally by Nyonkabe, alongside skills, was the piece around like what are businesses going to have to do to keep up with the future world of work. And that really speaks to, in my mind, what does being a top employer look like in this new world? And linked to that, just want to share some, ideas. Nyonkabe spoke about businesses becoming remote. I mean, not so long ago, PwC announced that they will allow 40,000 US client services employees to work virtually and live anywhere they want in the world, which I think is a massive thing. Not so long ago, I read an article saying that, even though majority of meetings are still currently happening from the comfort of people's homes, 49% of employees have admitted that they do other unrelated work or daydreaming while they're in meetings, and so it has impacted their engagement. And then something really interestingly, about a week ago, I ordered Nando's online. I phoned the Nando's call center in South Africa to order a meal And the lady who took my call at the same time was nursing her newborn baby. And then so in between talking to me and taking my call, her baby was crying in the background. And I thought it's really interesting that we're working in this kind of world where a call center that used to be based in a building and had specific hours, these people are now working from home. It's changing the way that we work. And so I'd love to dive into this topic of how do you become an employer of choice? How do you envisage the future and think about what that looks like? And I know this is something that Nyonkabe has quite a lot of insight and interest in because she did address it in her first kind of point. And I'd love to just hand over to her again, just to talk us through some of these ideas from her side.
Thank you once again. Yeah, quite something I'm excited about for two reasons. One, I don't think anyone can tell with absolute certainty what the future is going to bring, whether it's in the world of work. So it enables us to create into a world of unknown. Two things I would like to emphasize. One, the need for organizations to recognize and measure performance more in terms of outcomes than inputs. In the past, because people were present, physically present, a lot hung on to the fact that somebody was in the office, either clocked in at 7 and left at 4 or 8 and 5. Now people are working remotely. So it's a question of leaders learning new ways of leadership that's going to enable us then manage teams remotely more effectively. The second one I would like to talk about is well-being. With the pandemic has brought about in many people an epiphany and a realization. One, of what they have and had, and two, what they would like to experience in the future, whether it's in their lives, their personal lives, their workspace, their careers. And as a result, we are working with people who are carrying a lot, physically, mentally. Some people are dealing with the post-traumatic impact of surviving a pandemic. Others maybe are providing primary care for people who have been ill, or others even lost people along the way. We lost colleagues. So bring that into the workplace. There is increased need for organizations to take care of people's well-being, to find avenues and products and benefits that are going to continually invest in the full centrum of well-being, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, financial as well, to help people build resilience and enable them to cope in the future. That calls for, and Tess talked about it, a need to lead differently, a need to lead with a lot more empathy, a lot more vulnerability, and a lot more human. Thanks.
Sorry, guys, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Nyonkabe. I'd then love to direct the same kind of thinking and question and hand that over to Tess. Again, I know that this is a space that you guys do have a significant amount of research in, and would love to hear that from you.
Thanks, Yael. And when we talk about top employers of choice, it was typically, did the company have the best policies? Did they have the best processes? And very rarely was the employee actually taken into account. So it's now become very much about the employee experience if we look at what a top employer looks like. And if we look at the employer value proposition, I mean, Nyonkabe probably knows this better than anyone. I mean, we spoke about well-being, we spoke about career in terms of skills, and then the compensation factor. But skills has become, a really critical element of the EVP because continuously people want to learn, and that's changed. But at the same time, I mean, if we look at COVID. The burnout percentages were really high because, I mean, we weren't traveling to work, so we were just expected to function from the time we woke up until the time we slept, sometimes into the early hours of the next morning. Um, and we weren't prepared as organizations. Not many were actually prepared for this pandemic, right? And I mean, to no fault of anyone. But the world has changed. It's going to continue changing, but employers need to stay very close to employees. So it's no longer just a case of let's do an engagement survey, look at the results, wait for it to increase or decrease, and then put it away until the next year. It's actually listening to the voice of the the employee rather, sorry, and delivering on what you've promised. So what is your employee value proposition? Does it speak to the employee? Are the values in your organization just something that's printed on the canteen walls, or are you actually living and breathing those values? So if we look at the different generations as well, their expectations are very different. So employers need to make sure that they're actually catering for the different personas as well, and this will increase, talent attraction and retention. But I guess just keep on listening.
Thank you, Tess. I think, yeah, very, very interesting points and so relevant and current at the moment. And when I did introduce myself, I spoke about one of our tech products called Pulse Motivation. And the thinking behind what that is to understand what drives and motivates different people in different generations, different ages, different backgrounds, different work experiences, and helping organizations to get insight to make those changes from an incentive and an EVP perspective. And I think thinking about that for organizations of the future is really important. I'd love to bring Gibson on now just to speak, because I know that he's got a lot of insight into what some of the leading organizations are doing around the globe. So Gibson, over to you.
Yeah, so I was nodding vigorously as Tess was speaking, because I mean our data points to exactly the same things, and it's really around what these organizations have in terms of purpose, because what we are hearing employees saying is that they want to work for a company whose purpose they identify with. The other thing is the general structure of the organization, and is there agility within the workforce. Then the third, of course, like we've said, is that employee value proposition. Is there avenue for growth? Are they being incentivized to demonstrate their capabilities? Do they have job security? And that is really important, because as we go into the future, the profile of the workforce is going to change. I think I read a statistic that the amount of contingent workers that worked for Google last year was more than the number of full-time employees. So, of course, and one of the issues that our contingent workforce is really grappling with is job security. So that is a really key issue for HR people to speak about. How are you positioning the employee value proposition to cater for the different kinds of workforces? And then finally, the people. So do they trust the leadership? Is there a collaborative work environment, especially because you have all these different types of work being put together? And then manager support. And Nyonkabe has really spoken to that. What is the leadership doing to equip people to really deliver on the core understanding of what the organization stands for? I think that's a really key issue that will also need to be addressed. Yeah.
Gibson, I love something that you just mentioned around job security. And I think the reason why it's so important, especially in an Africa-based space, to talk about is because the current buzzword at the moment is this great resignation that's happening in the US and in some first world countries. Where in Africa, we are in such a different position, where job security is so important in countries where the unemployment rate is so high that it seems strange to talk about job security in an EVP, but actually, even in our own motivation tool, job security is something that can be hugely motivating for people based on their current life circumstance. And I think that that's something that we often don't think about with regards to an EVP, but it's something that is becoming more and more critical in this new world of work, where there's the fear and anxiety around what does my job potentially look like in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, and am I going to be good enough to keep this job? And not good enough because I'm a good employee who produces exceptional work, but will there be a need for me and the kind of skills that I have? So I think are really interesting. With that said, I'd love to bring Jack into the conversation because I think he's got immense insight into accessing the best next generation of employees and what are they looking for, how to be an attractive employer for youth, particularly linked to what's been said previously by some of our other panelists. So Jack, over to you.
Thanks very much. And it's been fascinating to hear the different perspectives actually around sort of some of the benefits and things like that. To me, when we work with lots and lots of young people and across different countries. So what someone's looking for in Nigeria might be very different from what someone's looking for in Mozambique. That would be kind of one of the first things that I would say. But there are some similar principles. And to me, when I think about the theme of this whole topic area, one of the principal things to me around the future of work is people. And the future of work is, who those next generation of people are going to be coming into the business. There's also an enormous untapped market across Africa, and that is young people. And yet at the same time, we hear about an enormous competition for labour, and finding the best talent can be often really challenging. And it might be because there are thousands of CVs coming in. It might be that there isn't the processes in place to be able to find the best people. But we know that there are diamonds in there. There are brilliant young people who can go into employers. And so therefore, it's really important to think about, well, what's attractive for them to become to join an employer? How can you become an employer of choice to those young people? And I think, when I think about this principally, you've got different scenarios where some companies and some industries can outpay other industries. So I think of, for example, the oil and gas industry has an ability to normally pay significantly more in terms of salaries. And so young people will be attracted to that salary proposition. But what about those organizations that can't afford the same salary rates as the oil and gas industry? And so then there's around, well, how can we provide other benefits? What are those other attractive pieces that can be linked to helping young people be attracted to a job, to an opportunity? And I think there's a few little differentiators that organizations can do. And so often they aren't done and not done effectively. And one is being really upfront about that as an employer. I think when I think a lot about in the industrial space, again, some of the projects that we've been working on lately, as well as kind of the salary proposition, there's things around feeding. Do young people get given food on the job, or is that something that they need to go off and find and pay for themselves? Do their families get insurance? Again, that's a really big factor, particularly linked to sort of health and welfare and those sorts of things. The other thing is accommodation. Can young people be provided accommodation? And so then that then links to, well, what's my career pathway? So if companies can help provide clear career pathways and what those journeys look like, what training and further development they'll get, those are the sorts of things where I feel like beyond just the salary, that's where you can be a really attractive employer to young people. And so often it's kind of flipped, and it's meant to be that the employer is expecting the most out of the employee, the new young person, but what can the employer do to be attracted to find that top talent? And I think that's a really, really interesting thing. And I totally agree with what Gibson and Yael were talking about around job security. That's absolutely critical amongst all of this. So I'll stop there because I'm conscious of the 3-minute rule.
Thanks so much, Jack. Just really appreciate your insights there. And I think I just want to touch on something that has come up to some extent in some of the EVPs that have been discussed in the panel, but really the topic of health and wellness and employee well-being in the new world of work. I just wanted to share something recently. I recently had a conversation with the ex-CEO of Uber South Africa, who's recently just launched a new app live in South Africa called Join Panda. With the intention of it going global. It's a really interesting technology because it's giving employees and anyone in the world access to something in the comfort of their own home, within their own hand and their control, something to help them with their mental health and well-being, where there will be daily sessions that you can log into to learn about different things. And I think like the traditional health and wellness opportunities, which is just businesses offer employees the opportunity to see a psychologist, is not necessarily the only way to think about mental health in the future. And so I'd love to hear from you guys just what your thoughts are with regards to how do we ensure that space of health and wellness and well-being for employees in the new world of work. So happy to let Gibson jump into that. I know that he has a lot of insight into what some leading organizations are doing for this in Africa.
Yeah, and I'll also let Tass speak about this. It helps when there's a different a statistic to just back up what I'm going to say. But I think, yes, wellness is a really key issue. And you talked about the Great Resignation. If you saw the Bloomberg report yesterday, 4.2 million people quit jobs in the US, 4 million in June. So that is a real key issue. And people think, oh, okay, so that is happening in the States. So how is that affecting us in Africa? Well, that is not important unless you read. I think I saw on if any of the audience are in Kenya, they would have seen a full newspaper blown advert asking nurses to go to the UK. So the fact is that a lot of HR people right now might be training people for a company in Europe. So you need to have a proper EVP that is going to really appeal to the employee on the ground. And a key part of that, a key part of those resignations we are seeing is because people just don't feel that they're well enough. And that wellness could be from a physical health perspective. Are they getting good medical insurance? From a financial wellness perspective, do they have good funeral and life insurance? I mean, not all countries in Africa are like Nigeria, where life insurance is compulsory. And then just the social well-being, are they feeling connected? Because one of the most engaged companies that I've ever had a survey for, one of the key things that we saw about them is that there's this real sense of connectedness that they have that just makes people identify with the work that they're doing. And one of the key statistics I saw with them is that 98% of them said that they were ready for a new role. And primarily because they saw that there was a threat in terms of how the business was going to continue existing in the future. So wellness is a key conversation to have in the context of a future of work.
Great. Gibson, thank you so much. So I am very cognizant of time. I know we're sitting at around the 42-minute mark. And our session today is an hour. So I'd like to wrap up in around 10 minutes. So I know that people and attendees listening are there. We're starting to see some questions coming in. If anyone else, would like to add some questions to the chat, we're currently collating them and just seeing if there are any relevant questions that we'll address in the next kind of 10 minutes. But with not too much time left, I'd really love to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Something that in South Africa, and I think in Africa in general, has been a topic of conversation for a number of years. But the conversation has to start changing when we're looking at the future of work and what does that look like. So Tess, I'm going to ask you to jump in here. I know this really is one of the areas of expertise that you have, and we'd really love to get some insights from you on this.
Thanks, Yael. Definitely one of my the areas I'm very, very passionate about. And I mean, we speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity is the numbers, and inclusion is the actual experience. So a lot of companies previously were always just like, did we make the numbers? Did we make the numbers? But now employers are actually holding employers accountable for that experience. So this also ties in very closely to the employee value proposition. So, are you reducing the unconscious bias in hiring, for example? And we spoke about skills. There's also a bias when it comes to training initiatives. Which employees get first preference when it comes to those good initiatives? Do all employees have equal access to these opportunities? And is there transparency across the organization to create that that equity or that equal environment for all the employees. But I mean, we still have a long way to go. And I know based on the World Economic Forum's analysis, they say it's like a minimum of 80 years before we can actually see women have an equal platform as men. And that's a long time to go. But that timeline is actually increasing as a result of the pandemic. And if we look at some countries in Africa, it was only very recently that laws were uplifted where women still needed permission from their husbands to get a job or to even study. So we still have a lot of work to go before we can actually say, we've made advancements or we've changed, but we have to start trying. And I had a conversation with the HR director in an energy company, sorry, a coal mining company recently. And underground mining is not attractive for a woman. It's also not something that a woman wants to go into because of the physical work. And they've actually automated processes, meaning that women can actually take over these roles now, which is great because that means it's changing the landscape for women in this space. But again, ESG plays such an important role in the space. So just leadership actually need to take more accountability and visibly show the workforce that there's a broader talent pool. Candidates can have access to the opportunities, and that they can take these opportunities. So it's just about creating that environment where everyone feels included. Yeah, thanks, Yael.
Thank you so much, Tess. I think it's a very relevant and important conversation. And I know that Jack has some insights here, especially with regards to the challenges and the strategies about increasing women in the workforce, especially at the entry-level position. And how do we get women, in the world to enter the workforce, and what do those opportunities look like for them? So, Jack, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Sure, and I've got a couple of kind of thoughts here. The first one was that was really interesting what you just said there, Tess, about the energy or the mining company and those roles around what's attractive for women versus men. And I think that's shifting. We work with a lot of energy and mining companies, and we see a great deal of young women attracted to those traditionally male roles. And I think there's a few things here. The first one is we've got, and interestingly, Deanna has just put a comment on this on the chat. There's this catch-22 situation across the world. This is not just Africa, it's all over the world, whereby you've got employers saying that they need a certain level of experience from candidates. And so you've got the position there saying, we'll hire someone who has 3 years worth of experience, say. But the trouble is you've got this catch-22 situation where young people can't get internships, they can't get that experience. And so I think there needs to be some flexibility here. And we see there's a particular bias for women there because they're placed into particular roles, perhaps in their national service or alike. And so how can we break down that catch-22 situation of the experience requirement? I think that's a big thing. Talking more about that bias thing, I'll give an example of a project we're working on in Nigeria, where we've been tasked with identify, training and preparing 100 young people to go into an industrial organization. And the company has tasked us to find 50 entry-level female forklift operators. Now, there's a challenge there, which is that this company needs to work in shift patterns, 24 hours a day. And there is a legal requirement within Nigeria that women cannot work night shifts. And so that automatically puts a preventer on young women accessing those sorts of jobs. I'll give one last kind of thought to this around sort of accessing those young people and the challenge that we face still, in my opinion, which is to do with culture. One of the things we do is we run really in-depth selection processes to attract and identify the best and brightest young people. When we first started doing this several years ago, we brought in different representatives from companies into that final phase of the selection process that we run. And that final phase is around identifying people who are outgoing, who are going to be great personalities in your business, who are going to kind of really promote themselves. And so what we do is we get them doing group work, we get them doing activities, we get them interacting with these company representatives and working in teams. However, and we ran this first one in Ghana. However, the company representatives were principally men, line managers who were males from organizations within industrial organizations. And largely, we look for people like ourselves. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say is that there is also a cultural challenge that we faced, which was that, and we've seen this all over the world, and not just in Ghana, but principally in Ghana, we saw that those young women throughout their education, and these are education leavers, were told, don't speak up to men, don't shake their hands, don't look them in the eyes, and don't speak out. And so we were proactively telling these male or people who are managers from organizations to go and find those exuberant people who are looking you at the eye, shaking you by the hand. And yet there was this cultural challenge that we saw around, well, young women throughout their sort of life were told not to do that. And so I think there's a couple of things here about how we can change some of these biases. Some are policy based, some of them around being more open-minded around experience and offering internships. And then there's one around thinking about how can we overcome some of the big cultural issues that we face on a national basis.
So yeah, Jack, I think really interesting. And someone did ask a question in the chat. A lady named Diana has asked something that says a lot of employers are looking for employees with work experience. And you addressed this to some extent. How can they help those graduates with no experience, but they're eager to learn new skills? And potentially they might have a degree or education in essence, but they don't necessarily have an experience. So just I know you have spoken, and I know you're very strict on your 3-minute rule, but do you have any kind of tips and insights or strategies that businesses are doing in order to give young people some experience, even if that doesn't mean long-term employment?
I think it's so difficult. I think because for those young people, how do they make that happen? And so often you see young people knocking on the door. All of us as sort of business leaders we get LinkedIn messages all the times or emails saying, please can I have access to something, but they're not necessarily well positioned or worded. I think there's some really interesting things happening around the world. There's a group that I know of that are producing online free internships. The issue again there is around the digital divide, and access to internet and the cost of data and things like that for young people can be a real barrier to accessing these things. But there are organizations, large organizations, banks and alike, who essentially develop online free internships that can help those young people. From our perspective, we try and work with employers and bridge that gap with young people. But I feel like I haven't really answered Diana's question, but there are things that can be done.
Okay, great, Jack. Thank you so much. I know that Nyonkabe has some insight into that, but Jack did give us a lot of insights on a number of different pieces. So I just need to rewind some of the conversation just in terms of some of the key pieces that Nyonkabe would like to speak to. And I know that the leadership mindset piece is something that's really important to you, Nyonkabe. So if you don't mind butting in that particular piece, and then I know also just giving us some insights into how do we kind of bridge this gap and give learners the opportunity to gain some experience, even if that isn't long-term full employment.
Thank you. So speaking to Nyasha, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Nyasha Clark, one of the greatest challenges we found in adopting future flexible working, especially the hybrid aspect of working, is resistance to change. And I can appreciate that a shift from traditional coming into the office every day, 8 to 5, or whichever work schedule people have, to a situation where a majority of people are working remotely. It's difficult to grapple with if an organization or a leader hasn't dealt with that before. at the bank, we first mooted the idea of flexible working over 3 years ago, yeah? And between then and 2020 March, we only had a 3-4% success rate. And then COVID happened and everybody worked remotely for a period of time. And then now we are coming out of that into a more long-term future flexible workplace arrangement. What we've done over that time, we've experienced a number of feedback and reservations from both leaders and teams on how effective that would be. First and foremost, we've worked with the leaders to understand their reservations. What is it exactly that they're uncomfortable about? Is it a question of productivity? And in which case, then we equip them with ways to be able to lead effectively, even when they are not having face-to-face interactions with individuals. We've also then equipped them with skills and capabilities to lead for the future. That includes ability to inspire remotely, ability to engage teams, drive collaboration, ensure preferred culture permeates through the organization, even when they are working with teams remotely. And by continually embedding the right leadership capabilities, it's giving them the confidence to be able to lead effectively. So it's a journey. I think we are 70-80% there, because just last week in Nigeria alone, we got 78% of our colleagues choosing to work flexibly. So it's a journey we are making, lots more successes. We've piloted it in smaller teams, which then gives the leaders more confidence when they test with a pilot that it actually can and will work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nyonkabe. I know that Gibson has some insight into, this very similar realm, but really on some practical ideas of preparing for the future of work. So Gibson, we'd just love to hear what some of those insights are.
Yeah, so very briefly, I think the whole conversation here has been around what employers can do. And unfortunately, there's only so much employers can do. I think there is also a conversation to be had around what these potential employees should be doing. I think we need people who are more agile, we need people who are more resilient, people who are willing to take rejection, people who are willing to avail themselves of forms. I think as we get into AI and big data.
Gibson, I'm so sorry. I am just going to cut you off. Your sound is coming in and out. Are the rest of the panelists having challenges hearing Gibson? Okay, great. Okay, great, Gibson. It sounds like now it's working. So if you don't mind just reiterating the last 30 seconds of what you were saying.
Saying that it is also incumbent that the potential workforce play their part in terms of what they're going to contribute to this conversation, because there's only so much employers can do. So I was talking about availing themselves on talent platforms and showcasing their skills so that people can be able to come and shop for them. Being resilient and being able to handle rejection, I think, is a key point that the potential workforce needs to also prepare themselves for. And I think also just making sure that they are skill ready, right? There's this new concept of knowledge architecture. And I think, Jack, you alluded to it. Sometimes within an organization, it's easier to find skills on LinkedIn rather than within your own organization. You do not know what kind of skill base or talent you have. So within the organization, I think there's also a conversation that needs to be had around knowledge architecture and how do you know the kind of talent that you already have, so that you don't have to go out looking, whilst you can actually build and reskill within the workforce that you already have. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Gibson. I think in line with what you're speaking about, Tess has some insight with regards to the differences between the different generations and what they thrive on, and the fact that organizations need to take that into account when considering these types of things. So Tessa, I'm going to hand over to you just to chat about this with us.
Thanks, Yels. And I'll be very quick. And I think Inyasha asked a very, very important question about, how do senior management actually deal with the different requirements? But the key again is to understanding the different personas in the organization, because a one size fits all approach is not going to help. It's not relevant anymore. And employees know that, they have the flexibility to move to other organizations in some instances. So if we look at Generation Z and Y, they thrive on opportunities to learn, whereas Generation X and the baby boomers are actually thriving on recognition. So they want to be recognized, and that's very different from opportunities to learn. So it's important for organizations and employers to actually understand what matters to people. And at the same time, I just want to emphasize and re-emphasize, this is not an HR accountability. Leadership need to get very close to this. Managers, senior managers, all levels of the organization need to get closer to employees, because it's not HR's responsibility to actually tell you what matters to the employee that you're spending 8 hours, if not more, within a day with. So understand what they value.
Thank you so much, Tess. So, Jack, I'd like to just jump back over to you, just with regards to some of the things that Field Ready is doing in the space, and just some of the opportunities that they're providing to people from a free training and advice perspective.
Sure, thanks, Yael. We've been doing a few things, and one of the things that we've done is we've built an online platform for young people to go on to register, access materials, learning resources. We have monthly webinars where we bring in industry, a bit like this, to talk about and talk to young people about what they're looking for, how young people can do stuff. And we've got some great training and free resources for young people too on that platform. So young people just have to go and register, and then they get access to all of those resources for free. We use that as a tool to build essentially a database of brilliant young people that we can put through learning programs and training programs pre-employment, that then go into employment, and then you've got brilliant employers hiring brilliant young people too.
Awesome, Jack. Thank you.
May I also just say about, I think there was a really interesting point about what Tess was saying about different generations, and how you get those different generations working together. I think a big factor, a great way within organizational structures of creating a great interaction between different generations is through upwards and downwards mentorships. And these are complicated. You can't just expect them to happen overnight. They have to be well structured, well managed. You have to make sure that there's a great level of safeguarding in place. You have to have the right mentor with the right mentee, and there needs to be a structure around that. But if you get it right, the older generations benefit so much from inputs from youth, but then you also just get so much downward knowledge sharing, which I deeply encourage as many organizations and HR leaders that are listening to support mentoring. That said, you can't just expect someone to be a mentor. They need to be trained. And so one thing that we are also doing is helping companies to train their managers to be great coaches of junior people, of managers as well. So that's a really, really important factor in my opinion.
I think that's a very relevant point. And I think if I refer back to my own experience of leaving university and joining the working world, I had a master's degree in organizational psychology, kind of had the expectation that I'm entering the organization as the head of HR, even though I was joining an internship. And very quickly on day one, I realized that the HR administrator in the big insurance company that I had joined had so much more knowledge and insight than I had. I had a nice piece of paper and degree with a lot of theory behind me, but no practical experience. And I had to utilize and work with people in those roles in the business who really showed me the ropes and taught me everything that I knew. And we got to a point in time where I suddenly had more knowledge and I could work and share that knowledge with them. And they had the element of experience where they could show me practically how to do certain things at work. And I think that speaks to something that's really just so critical and important. That actually reminds me of that movie. I think it's called The Internship, where old Robert De Niro joins the working world after 30, 40 years of experience, not to know how to turn on his MacBook Pro. And with so much wealth and knowledge and experience, not being able to potentially keep up with some of the technical challenges. And I think bridging that gap and thinking around mentorship, and I think to Jack's point, mentorship of experienced and old and highly knowledgeable and skilled people to younger people, and vice versa. I think the mentorship up is also a really interesting space to talk about. So I know that we have spoken about a lot of topics. It is currently, we've got about 25 minutes left before we wrap up the session. And we've spoken about some really interesting different pieces. I know there's some questions in the chat that we're currently collating, and we're going to chat about in a couple of minutes. But I think the one thing which I think is really interesting to bring up and to share some time talking about is, how can businesses effectively identify who needs to be retrained and upskilled, and what is it that they need to be retrained or upskilled on in order for them to keep up? And I think that Tess has some insight into this. And I know that I'm sure some of the other panelists do as well. But I'd really like to talk practically about how are we going about identifying what those skills are. And that sits across a number of different businesses, industries, skill sets. And how then are we taking that knowledge and information and empowering our existing workforce today? So Tess, if you don't mind, I'm going to hand that question over to you, and then get some of the other panelists to share some of the experiences on this with us.
Okay, thanks, Yael. So I think an important point here is that we need to understand as organizations that, workforce planning is no longer just a linear process. There's a lot more effort required to identify the skills that are required for the future. Now, previously, I know organizations we didn't really do strategic workforce planning. If there was a need, then we went out and recruited. I'm not sure if it was Jack or Gibson who made the point about, identifying the skills that you have within the organization first. So identify the parts of the business which will decline or grow, which is a very important part of strategic workforce planning. Understand if you're able to build, to buy, or whether you're going to borrow the skill or even bot. So when we talk about automation, and then identify the roles and the skills and the experience levels that are critical to the health of the workforce. So again, remove that bias from the opportunity, because a lot of employees are capable if they're given the opportunity, but need to be able to actually identify that. And when we speak about career pathing, there shouldn't only be career pathing for the loud employees or the typically top performers. I mean, everyone has potential, so give them that opportunity. And then organizations also need to identify and plan for emerging skill scarcity, because if we look at, we speak about flexibility and we speak about mobility in the form of expats, for example. And Yael, you made the point, right? There's a lot of knowledge within countries, and previously, organizations sent expats around the world because there was some sort of arrogance at the same time that the capability didn't exist in the country, which is not exactly true. So again, identify what you need as an organization, and it's a case of HR getting closer to the business, align those plans, and then at the same time plan your experiences for the employee. So just give them that opportunity, but get better and start that process of strategic workforce planning. Organizations are on different journeys or at different points in that journey, but that skills gap was really highlighted during the pandemic. So it's been elevated, and now we just need to be retrained or reskilled, and it's going to require a lot of effort.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge amount of effort. I know that Nyonkabe, based on her experience in her role in Standard Chartered Bank, has some practical insights into this and just some examples in terms of how they are repurposing skills for the future. So Nyonkabe, over to you.
Thank you again. So last year, in the depth of the pandemic, late August, the bank undertook a study, spoke to our key business leaders and functions leaders to once again understand what the aspirations of the business was and the kind of skills they would look for over the next 3 to 5 years to enable the business thrive going forward. We took those skills and capabilities compared to the body of skills and capabilities that we have in the bank, and were able to identify clearly which areas we needed to build on, which particular skills we needed to repurpose. We were even able to identify which roles may no longer be relevant in 2-3 years' time and which roles will. A typical example of that was the role of teller, and I think, Bianca, it speaks to your question. Given the continued sophistication by clients and need for self-service, we've seen a significant drop in footfall by the number of clients that walk into brick and mortar branches, and most clients are now depending on on online platforms. So that has reduced the dependence on the teller, especially the transactional activities undertaken by a teller. So we've taken our teller population and reskilled them with skills called universal banker, where they are able to provide value-adding financial advisory services, which is the kind of value that a client would now need, especially given that they are able to transact by themselves without having to come in and face off with a person to count currency notes. So, and that has served to enlarge and expand the experience of a teller, in that they're now providing a broad range of skills and capabilities. It's something we are going to continue to do, and on a broader scale, the bank has set up 10 future skills academies that train on the broad skills that will be required in the future.
Okay, great. And Nyonkabe, can you give us any insights? I understand if some of it may be confidential, but any insight into what those academies really focus on?
Yes. So there's one on, no, it's not confidential. There's one on data and analytics academy. I wouldn't be able to remember all 10 of them. Okay, data and analytics, digital skills academy, new ways of working, agile. The technical aspects of agile working, the scrums, the teams, the swarms, the tribes, and how that whole project management aspect works. Because we believe that going forward, a lot of work will be project-based in the future, and we need to reorganize ourselves to be able to serve clients in that way. So that's another academy. We have one on human skills. I mentioned the need for us to continually invest in human leadership skills to be able to influence and be more empathetic when dealing with colleagues. And there's one on AI. I think those are the ones I can remember offhand. And they are all there's an interface. They are all curated to meet the needs of the bank, at the same time taking the best of some of the learning platforms that are available. The one we use is called Discover platform. Okay. People can self-register onto it.
Okay, wow. I think this is a really interesting aspect. And just what an amazing opportunity for your employees to get the opportunity to potentially join these kinds of academies. And just kind of enhance their existing skill set. So their jobs might not be redundant today or tomorrow in the next year or two, but being able to build these skills over time for what the coming years could look like, I think is just a really amazing opportunity for them. So very exciting stuff. I'd then love to just chat through a few more practical kind of case studies and insights with regards to this piece of work. And so I'd love to give Jack and Gibson just the opportunity to speak.
Hi, I've got just a quick question for Nyonkabe though. For those academies, who chooses who goes on and what they learn? You talked about the Discover Learning platform, but is it the managers that put them onto the program? Is it HR, or is it the individuals themselves?
The individuals themselves. We've
Okay.
democratized learning so that people are able to curate their own learning paths depending on the career paths they have.
That's really, really interesting, and totally linked to the case study I was about to say, because I did some work with an organization in Bahrain, and I speak with a word of warning. This was a large organization that had been operating for many, many, many years, and I refer to this because I was thinking about what Tess was saying about the fact that we should analyze what Gibson said earlier about analyzing what resources we already have, what knowledge already exists in our companies, and how to bring in new skill sets. And so this company was bringing in a new learning management system alongside a bunch of other HR systems, but principally around the LMS. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to analyze their workforce in terms of the skill sets, and they ranked people. So they gave people sort of a series of sort of things around whether it was a soft skill or a technical skill, and people were ranked, and people were given preferential treatment if they had particular certifications or certificates or qualifications in a particular field. So they did this study of all of the employees, and there was a huge backlash from the employees to this activity, because they all thought that I'm being analysed, and if I don't hit the bill, if I don't hit the mark, then I'm going to lose my job. So again, this comes back to the job security thing. So there's kind of a word of warning around, if you're trying to analyse your business and what the skill sets are, it needs to be done really carefully. And in particular, I think there's that links to many of the older people who are working in the business maybe had skills where they didn't have necessarily a qualification or a particular formal sort of certificate, but they were unbelievable at their jobs. And if they were asked to do welding, they were brilliant, and they didn't necessarily have the international standards to do it, but they'd got 50 years worth of experience in doing so, for example. So just something around that. And I think that, exactly what you were saying, Nyonkabe, about, individuals get to choose their learning kind of streams, whether that's in project-based work, and I totally agree with you, that's a big way in which things are going, or around human leadership stuff. I think we have to be cognizant as managers not to just put someone onto a training program, that being HR and the line managers, because unless someone wants to learn something, and again, this talks to Tess's perspective around the fact that unless you want to learn, you're not going to thrive in it. You're not going to embrace it. You're not going to take it on. So I think there always has to be a communication between the HR, the line, and the trainee about what journey they're going on, whether they want to do it, and making sure that they are fully embraced, so that then there is true behavioural change at the end of a training program.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jack. So insightful. Gibson, I'd love to hand over you. I know that you've got experience from your team. From your team.
For me, mine is like mine is a personal experience, and it really speaks to what Jack was talking about. Being presumptuous sometimes, and I think I got into this field and I said, "Hey, I'm going to build a role team," and I just looked for people who had aptitude for mathematics, people who were very keen and were excited about numbers, and I had a very, very good actuarial team. And if anybody familiar with actuarial exams, so every on there would be expecting a promotion, but at the end, if you took them to have a conversation with a client about retirement, about the client was not listening to them, listening to this very old 7-year-old that they call. So again, it also speaks to this kind of multi-generational appreciation that even the older folk in our organizations really have an important role to play. I just wanted to talk to, don't be too presumptuous, throw in technology before the needs you have for it, which is what I did. I just went and said, okay, I need this one. I need to have a team of big data analysts. And you might know it, but I told them, and I can actually monitor the way they do their work on DataCamp, how many courses they've done on DataCamp, where they're having difficulty, and that was a total failure. But when we got the older gentleman to tell them that this is actually linked to the conversation that you're going to be having to a client, then we saw a much better uptake. And then we also added to that, there's about 6 masterclasses that the employees can go through. And it's not Gibson telling them that they need to go for that. They can actually choose. And there's an app called Cornerstone. It's a public app. And they choose and they say, you know what, I want to concentrate on the future of work, or I want to concentrate on retirement and things like that. I think that really helps in engaging this young workforce a lot better. Yeah, so that's really my personal experience in terms of how it should work. Yeah.
Thank you, Gibson. It's just great to hear not just scenarios or case studies of your experience as someone who works within this field at work, but rather like what it's really meant for you. I think that's it's just really great to feel like it's practical for us too, and that we're also kind of in the same boat alongside employees as well, which I think is really interesting. So we don't have too much time left. We've got 10 minutes and we'll probably just want to wrap up a few minutes before and thank our panelists for their time. So I'd love to direct to some of the questions that have been asked. Some of them we have already dealt with in some of the previous conversations that we've had so far, but I'd like to just address one of the questions posed by Ben Andrews. So the question is, my biggest concerns for the future of work is that those in senior positions with more traditional mindsets won't be willing to move with the times and ultimately adapt to the newer generation's views on work and working environments. And I think that speaks to some of the generation gaps that we have spoken about. And I don't know if there's anyone who really wants to just tackle this question for a couple of minutes, just with some of their experience up and to date.
Can I start? And I know Jack wanted to add, if you don't mind. So Ben, I mean, Ben, that's such an important question and such a good observation. And I think that point is very prevalent and sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, sorry, cut out just for 2 seconds, so you're good to go.
Perfect. So, the employer brand is like bread and butter, right, for attraction and retention of employees. So if you want to attract and retain good talent, top talent, and be able to have your good employer brand out there, that takes a lot of effort. Now, Mercer runs a global talent trends survey annually, where we, survey hundreds of companies, a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and the top 4 consistent things that came out, regardless of generation, that employees want from the employees is for them to be empathetic. And, Nyonkabe and I mentioned that earlier on, support me with caring for myself and what matters in my life. It needs to be enriching. So help me have an impact and fulfill my personal or professional purpose. It needs to be embracing. So help me feel like I belong in the organization, and let me be myself. And it needs to be efficient. So make it simple and easy for the employer. So those very quickly will definitely improve the employer brand, and senior leadership have to embrace those things.
Absolutely. I think empathy is probably the number one topic just at the moment for leaders. And I think in my own business, speaking to the different things that generations need, but just when you take the time you need to show empathy and care for your employees, the knock-on effect of that in so many ways with regards to their engagement at work, their job satisfaction, their performance, their commitment, it literally just has a knock-on effect on every single thing that employers want to drive. And so I think that's really important. Jack, I'd love to jump over to you. I know you really enjoyed Ben's question. So yeah, please share with us.
Yeah, I liked, actually Ben put 2 things and I really like both his questions. The first question is like, is there any advice for soon to be graduates of how to hit the ground running in terms of their working career. And I think that there's a few things, and one of the things is this is a very, very, very busy marketplace, the labour market of graduates, particularly after the pandemic. The world has been flooded with more people going into the job market, and yet there are fewer jobs than ever. And so I think if you are a graduate, there are kind of three principal things to try and help yourself differentiate and get yourself out and above, beyond your peers. The first one is to find a mentor. And that sounds like really kind of vague, but like try and find someone in a field that you're passionate about and go and meet them, go and kind of share that your own passion, and see if they will offer you some time to give you some mentorship, and see, but be really kind of, to use that word that's been used, empathetic as well upwards. They're busy people, they haven't got lots of time, but try and find a way to get a mentor. The number two is there are several platforms out there to boost your skills beyond the ones that you will have learnt at university and in college. And so, one of the things that we started off with was Nyonkabe talking about some of those things around adaptability, about flexibility, about communication skills that are being sought by employers, whether that's in banking, industry, whatever sector. So see if you can upskill yourself beyond those existing skills. And we run programs. We've got a free platform and various other training programs that we run. But there are other ones out there as well, rather than just to promote our own one. Like, for example, Google have got this platform that they launched last year across Africa called Grow with Google. Free online training, and you can get a certificate, and it helps just to put that on your CV. The third one, where possible, try and get an internship. See if you can be open-minded about what that internship looks like. And if you are a graduate, do not just send out an email to an HR manager or director just with your CV saying, I'm looking for a job. Be personalized, be very specific, and make sure that when you write something, make sure that you stand out above the crowd and that you've tailored your response to exactly what they're looking for. So those are my three tips. And then the final one around the point, I totally agree with Tess. I think that this, when it comes to the concern around senior positions, working with junior people and those different mindsets, I think that is totally to do with upwards and downwards mentorship, and I would so encourage any companies that is bringing in young people to invest in coaching training and really good quality coaching training for their line managers, to make sure that there is a great communication flow between senior management and junior staff. So that's where I'll finish on that. Yeah.
Jack, thank you. Amazing points for graduates, which I'd love to chip in on, but I know Gibson has just one more point to add to that and would love to hear what he has to say.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's because a lot of, I get hundreds of CVs from graduates. And one of the things I really like is if someone says that they are conversant with Google Analytics. So very key what Jack is saying. The unfortunate thing, because I just decided to go and do the Google Analytics course, it says that it is a 6-month course, but actually, if you're not a beginner, you can finish it in 2 months. And if you look at the very top, it talks about the enrollment. And in Africa, they've had about 50,000 people enrolling. But if you look at the people who've graduated, it's only 10,000. So I just wanted to add to Jack's point that graduates need to carry through their commitment. Don't just start something and end somewhere in the middle. You just need to finish. And that's unfortunately one of the weaknesses that we are seeing in the graduate talent pool. Yeah.
Thank you, Gibson. Thank you so much. I'd love to just end on a personal story linked to being a graduate. So I came out of university a lifetime ago, back in 2012, and needed to secure myself an internship in order to fully qualify. And no one would look at me because at the time there wasn't a huge interest in South Africa for my kind of skill set. And I went to a company that I'd heard a lot about, based on their culture And I booked meetings with 3 different people, and I said to them, I need an internship and let me work for you for 3 months and don't pay me a cent. And if you see value in the work that I can provide your organization, you can consider making me some kind of contractor to complete my internship. And that's how I landed my first job. And it's the advice that I give graduates. You might have a degree. You're not worth a massive salary on the day one that you walk into an organization because you have 0 experience. And so your internship in a graduate program, you need to see as the final year of your studies to prove yourself, to prove your knowledge and your insight in the working world. And if you're able to just take that step in the door and shoot the lights out and prove yourself in excellence in your commitment, in your attitude to do anything, in the way that you engage with people, I think it lands up helping you to step yourself up above the rest. And I think that's really important. So I know we are officially out of time. We have 1 minute left, and I am a bit of a time police. So I don't want to take up too much time from everyone else. I would just love to thank the panelists, each and every one of you. Nyonkabe, you have been so insightful. Just with sharing some of the insights in Africa from a Standard Chartered perspective has been really eye-opening for me. I've loved it. Jack, just the insights into bridging the gap between graduates and this kind of new working world, I think has also been really insightful, especially what it means for myself, graduates that I'm going to be hiring soon, as well as what it means for my children in the coming years. Tess, I think we've just lost her from the call, but just such amazing insights from Mercer and the work that they're doing. Huge value in the research and understanding what the world looks like ahead. So Tess, I was just thanking you just for all your knowledge and insights from a Mercer perspective that you guys have done and what the future world of work looks like. And then Gibson, it's been really interesting, from your perspective, which is hugely statistical, as well as your personal experience in the chat, to understand what the world looks like for you in some of the spaces in North Africa. So thank you to each and every one of you. I know your time is precious. You have important jobs and important roles on our globe. And just thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.